back of napkins, or looped poems in my head when I'm doing the dishes. So words have been always very close to me. And so with She, I got a really good platform to be a co-author right from the start. And I think since the last 3 books also to be a co-editor. And basically by writing, I'm also learning at the same time. So that's me. And I'll hand you over to this really nice panel.
Thank you very much. I'm feeling a little bit lazy, so I hope you don't mind if I sit myself. I'm Brindarica Bose. You can call me Brinda. I'm an artist and also a writer. I came here almost 2 decades back in Basel, actually. And since then, I've been moving to Bibliothek, Bose, and so now I'm coming from Bose. I am heading the publications department of an international association for the last 19 years. And before that, I was working for a newspaper in India, Times of India. And along with my publication job, I love painting and drawing. So I'm also an art teacher in Bibliothek. We have a very active urban sketches group, and one of our members is actually sitting right over there and sketching us, Abhi. Thank you very much for coming. So yes, I'm an artist, a writer, and I love social activism, and that's why I'm here. I have 2 boys. My husband was born here, so my mom is also here at the moment. They are in Roland right now. So that's all about me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for giving up your Thursday evening for us. I mean, that really does mean a lot. Thank you for taking an interest in our books. So my name is Nayana Chakraborti, and but I also started recently writing under my nickname, as it were. Now I'm Bengali. If you know anything about Bengalis, we are a group of people from the eastern part of India, and we love our nicknames. Okay, one name is simply not enough, so we like to give ourselves many. So I started to write under my nickname, and it's very it's Rejina. The reason I started to do that is because it's the name that my mother chose for me. So my parents both had ideas of what my name could be. My father won out in the end, but my mother's name really stuck in the family. So when I'm not in my professional life, my nickname Rejina is what everybody calls me, and that's what I decided to bring into the writing. Now, a little bit about me is that I moved here with my family almost 10 years ago. I live in Zurich, live near Zurich now. I am a teacher of English, and whilst I have been helping other people to write for the entirety of my career, I've always looked at writing in quite a critical way. So putting pen to paper for the first time was actually terrifying. And had it not been for this group, I doubt I would have done it. So I'm very grateful that I've had a little bit more than a couple of stories kind of released with the She Writers Group. And it really means a lot to me that you're going to hear our latest book today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rejina, Sadhu, so everybody calls me Reddy. And coming to the point of nicknames, so I didn't have one till I went to college, and everybody called me Reg. But strangely, my brother's name is Regish, so we both were Reg. So it's very confusing in the family. So my parents always called us by our full names. Then when I met my husband, he gave the I at the end because he's a Bengali, and he thought that everybody wants to have a proper nickname. So I became known as Reggie. So that's the story behind my name. So I like what Abhilasha said. I think I cannot remember a time where I did not spend my time amongst books. So words have always played a big role in what I do. And strangely, my day profession is I work in the regulatory writing and submission state in the artist. So I do write a lot, but all technical writing. But the creative brain of mine gets quite busy, becomes quite busy, and sometimes it needs an outlet. And I used to do that for a long time and did in many different languages, Hindi, Marathi, and English. But when I was talking to Brinda and I got the opportunity to be part of this consortium of brilliant women who seem to have a voice which was so diverse at different parts, different experiences, different nuances. And I feel quite honored to be a part of this movement. And the fact that what we do also brings quite a lot of social issues to the limelight. I think that makes it much more noteworthy. So that's for me.
Yeah, so I'll just talk about the sheep. So in 2018, we were a group of women and I published my first book, Swiss Masala. And I was thinking, if I could write this in a group of women could come together, because I knew that there were so many women who could write so well, but they were just not getting the opportunity or, the time to sit down and write together. So we decided, why don't we come together, write stories about important issues which we want to talk about, because it's not always that you have to be a creative writer to publish a book. We all are working in different professions and we have important stories to tell. So it's contemporary women coming together, writing a book, coming up for a creative project and bringing a change. That was very important. So the concept of social activism, I don't know if you know about this, because it's like with creativity, when you're bringing a change, that's social activism. And that's what we all are trying to do. We all are working. We don't need the book sales to survive in that sense. But, with the book sales profit, that whatever we are getting, we are donating it to different underprivileged children's projects. And we are also nourishing our soul in a sense, because we are writing, we love writing, and we are telling the stories of so many women. For example, now with the shift to, after the she concept started, I also started my publishing house, which is a collaborative publishing house. I shouldn't say mine because we all are there together, and that's how the publishing house stands. So we started publishing books on different concepts. For example, this one, An Immigrant's Memoir. So here, he's talking about his, from partition of Bengal, he's talking about his journey from Bangladesh to India. Then we have Indian, for example, during the pandemic, we reached out to our grandmothers, 94 years old grandma, 70 years old grandma. We encouraged them to be active, just give us your recipes. So we were constantly collaborating with them. Write your recipes, give them to us. Don't, there is a lot of things going on in the media, wear a mask, this, that, but you can also be creative and do something even when the atmosphere is negative in that sense, So there are a lot of books. We came up with She Shines, which talks about stories of, women refugees, because I'm also an artist. I'm also teaching art to women from Ukraine at the moment, children from Afghanistan, and you see how much involved they get the moment they immerse themselves in art. So that is the concept behind this. Creative publishers together, not only the women you're seeing here, there are 45 plus women all over the world and 100 authors with those creative publishers, almost collaborators and authors. Around 11. So now I will maybe invite Nayana to talk about She Speaks. She was the co-editor for this book.
So yes, this is She Speaks, and this is our first baby. Okay, and so we're very, very proud of it. And I just want to when I look at the title page, I just kind of marvel, because when we started working on this in 2018, this was a couple of years before the pandemic. So this entire idea of collaborating with people from the opposite side of the world, people you have never met, people, unless you have many, many air miles, stocked up, you're very unlikely to actually physically meet. But to collaborate with them, to talk with them, to learn from them, this was such a unique experience. And so we have authors here from India, from New Zealand and Australia, okay, Indonesia, the USA, and of course Europe. And of course, all of the European authors are sitting here. Plus a few here and there. So this was just the most magical time And it was so exciting to write like this and to write with each other. And as I mentioned earlier, it was actually one of my first forays into writing. I'm the kind of person who writes on the margins of other people's work, and then I grade it at the end. It's like nice IGCSE grade or A. And here, you couldn't really do that because people had written their heart and soul out. And this was a learning project for me too, to understand that these stories were not just being told because, there was an examiner who was going to read it at the end of the day, but they were literally writing their souls out on paper. And writing makes you very vulnerable because you're sharing your daydreams with the world. And so it was very, very special, incredibly unique. And the range of voices that we have in here, I think I can say, like, honest to goodness, it's just kept on building up over the years. This idea that as long as you would like to contribute, as long as you're willing to put the work in, that you will be recognized in some way. I think that's very, very rewarding for our writers. It gives them that motivation to carry on, because sometimes I think, especially here, all of us had professions, we were doing things. We had very young children at that time, but we were sort of setting time aside for ourselves to write. And just a word that Brindarica has already mentioned before, it was very nourishing. And it was nourishing also to know that we were going to be able to pay it forward with our work. So yes, I'm going to hand it over to Rejina.
The second one, sorry, this one gets dropped out actually because it was a COVID baby. So this is the book, it's called She Celebrates. This was our second book. And I call it a COVID baby because we released it in 2020 in March, the 8th of March. This was really the peak of the pandemic. So it kind of went unnoticed, but what was really great about this book is that it sparked Bose creative publications, because we had, with the first book and then with the second book, we had a publisher and we did not have a great experience. We did not have our contracts fulfilled. It was not a great, let's say, it was unpleasant for us. And that's when Bose Creative Publishers was born. We thought, hey, why don't we just publish our own work? Why do we have to go to publishers? Why do we have to beg for this to be published and have contracts and so on and so forth? So this is why this is special. There's another reason why this book is special. It's because India is a land of festivals. So every single day in India is actually a festival. 365 days, more than 365 festivals, millions of gods. It's a diverse country, exactly. It's a diverse country. It's not just one religion, there are many religions, and each one has a festival. So there are many bank holidays in India as well. We have in this book 21 stories. Each story starts from January until December, so the solar calendar, based on festival. It ends with December with Nayana's story for Christmas. I think mine is Diwali, so it's somewhere around autumn. Yours is Brinda's is about Eid, which is somewhere in the middle of the year, and yours is somewhere in Reggie's is on Onam, which is in the south of India. So it's somewhere around. Each story has tries to capture the flavor of the festival. It's woven around it, and it's amazing how each author has come up with what that festival means to them. For example, Diwali for me meant not just lighting candles, but also dispelling internal darkness. So it's not just darkness or a victory of good over evil, but also of light over darkness inwardly. So not just the stories, but we also end this book with an illustration which depicts the flavor of each festival. And that's not enough, because we're also a land of food. We've got a recipe that corresponds with each festival after each story in this book. So it's a very special book. I hope you enjoy it as well. I'll hand it over to Reggie for the third book. Thank you.
So
this is a very special book for me as well. This is She Reflects. So first of all, this was the first time all of us authors, we embarked on writing flash fiction. Now, it's very easy to write, as they say, it's very easy to write reams and reams of letters, but when somebody asks you to make it precise and concise, you struggle. So it was very important for us to capture the gist of the story in very limited number of words. So I think this was a learning experience for all of us. And on top of that, you might have already heard in the video, this book has stories which have been put into 3 subsections based on the age of the protagonist. Okay. So we have kind of used a metaphor of the flowing river, like from the origins, where it starts very hesitantly and then takes on momentum, hurtling through the mountains, then at the end, get into a very calm phase. So we have the beginning where you have infancy and youth, and then you have middle age, and then you have the senior stage of our protagonists. And the stories, they bring you the experience of all of these protagonists, how they see the different life experiences themselves, and also what's going on in their heads and their observations in life. So it's really, really special to see that. And sometimes when I look at the stories from other people, I thought, I would never think that this particular story comes from this particular person. As Abhi mentioned, when you write something, you are writing a part of your soul before everybody to see. So you are actually exposing your vulnerabilities. You're being honest and transparent of what is going on in your head. So it's really sacred. So this is She Reflects. And after that came our really amazing and earth-shattering kind of book, which is She Shines. This book holds the souls of what it means to be, in the word, as you say, she shines. You can only see the light if there is darkness in the back. If it was lit all over, you don't see the contrast, right? So the mind of many of the protagonists in this book, you see how they go through the different phases of life, what they have experienced, maybe from an asylum point of view, maybe as a child in a school, maybe from what they are experiencing in their own homes, but it was about transcending above, using their resilience and shining through. So this is the story. It's a very, very special book. And Brinda has already mentioned, you have stories from the immigrants based on from Kabul, or people have looked at people around them, looked at what inspires them, how they have come up. And there's a hint of trueness in the stories. So that makes this particular book very special. And I was able to embark on my co-editing skills from this book onwards, so I'm honored that I could do that. And I move on to the next one. She Sees, our baby, the new one, the latest book. But we'll start with Nayana.
Okay, so I want to briefly introduce my story, and I'll try to pick a passage from it. Essentially, the book as a whole combines short stories that fall into 2 distinct genres. So there's mystery and there's nostalgia. I wrote about nostalgia, and I wanted to explore specifically what happens to female friendships, something that I've become very, very interested in exploring, especially, I suppose, as a consequence of living through the pandemic and of having a lot of my interactions become digital and having sort of my village, as it were, go digital too. And I was looking at what happens what happens if a very close friendship falls apart. as we are all expats here on this panel, and we have found our villages in each other in many cases. And I was exploring that. I wanted to look at what happens when your found family also gets broken. And what happens to all the people that you grow up calling aunts and uncles? See, in Indian culture, we don't tend to call our parents' friends by their first names. We call them aunts and uncles, but not just aunts and uncles. We have very specific names. So you have Mashi, that's your, or Masi, depending on which language you're speaking. And that's your mother's friend. And you see her now then as your mother's sister, because Mashi or Masi is what you call your own aunt too. So in my story, my protagonist meets a person from her childhood, someone who used to be her mother's friend, and who she had a very, very close relationship with, someone who she felt understood her better than her mother. And which I think when you're a teenager, that happens. There's always a moment when you fall out with your mum and you think, oh, but then she's nice, she's glamorous, and all that kind of stuff. So I was trying to sort of bring in a little bit of that element, and looking then also at bringing all of that nostalgia into my present life. So in Zurich. So I started the story, just looking for my story. It's towards the end. Sorry. Oh yes, I found it. I should have just thought of that. So I'm bringing all of that nostalgia into my present life in Zurich. And this is Zurich Station, just an hour away. So I'm going to butcher the French. I'm so sorry. Large protection. This is the Blue Angel that hangs up in Zurich Hauptbahnhof. I've always enjoyed the underbelly of the station. The shops shine brightly. There is a ceaseless bustle of activity, a sense of market and bazaar in this otherwise staid, buttoned-up town, and where in the glowing light, it always feels like that most delicious time of year, the run-up to Christmas. The shop windows shine an autumnal gold all year round. Look closely enough, and they almost appear mullioned. Or perhaps that is my nostalgia, my urge to look for romance, hope and possibility where there are none. Even the dank smell of rain-soaked flooring, raincoats and overcoats will not dampen my spirits, or discourage me from thinking that this place is the closest I have here, in Zurich, to home. It feels like the place for possibilities and yet to be realized potential. In my mind's reading, any moment could prove to be potentially destiny altering. I feel that at any moment I could dash to a platform, hop onto a departing train, and have my own achingly sweet, tender, brief encounter. I won't go on because I'd like you to read the story. But I will read you, the last thing I'll do is read my favorite line. So I think I've been building up to this line my entire life. No pressure. So, because this is it, a little known fact about me, and this is a little known fact about me, not just my protagonist. Blame it on Vikram Seth, or blame it on Bollywood. Blame it on my love for public transport, or the fact that my once upon a time best friend, aged 15, told me, before she dumped me, that a man would fall in love with me when I least expected it. That's it. So, before I read out my story, talk a little bit about the team behind She Seeks. So Lisa Ghosh is from US. She was the chief editor.
Rejina was one of the editors. Abhilasha was one of the editors. Ekta from Australia. Saleha from Australia, and also Ashwati from India. Ashwati made the video which you saw earlier.
And that nice voice in the video, that's
Yes.
hers.
And Jasli Fakteja from US and Vinita Godinha from Australia, they were the coordinators. So you see, that's the fun factor also, because everything is done in-house. We don't have the funds to go out and, have a team, but everything is done in-house. So we have the editors, this is me actually here. We went to Venice for some holidays, so everything is done by us, including the typesetting and editing work.
And proofreading.
Coordination. We have a WhatsApp group. We have not met so many people. So that's the power of building and collaboration. So my story is called Turiya. Turiya is, does anyone know about the word Turiya? You know about Turiya. So in Indian texts or in Mandukya Upanishad, for example, we say that there are 4 states. We have awake when we are awake, we are sleeping, when we are dreaming, and then there's a 4th state. That's the word Turiya. And that's when you're really connected to yourself, when you're really conscious about yourself. So we don't talk much about it, but it's there. So my story's title is Turiya because the protagonist, Radha, and the story is based around Basel. Because when I came to Switzerland, Basel was my home city, this is where I came. And the setting is in Barfuserplatz here. I used to live very close to Gundeli, close to the Bahnhof. And my protagonist Radha, she has undergone some health issues, but she has a lot of things in her mind, but she never wants to talk about it. And I will start reading from here. Rush, there is no time. This is what is going on in my head all the time too. Startled by the voice, Radha screeched to a halt. She got down from her bicycle and looked around. No one had spoken to her. Grey cars zoomed past her bicycle lane in the early morning rush hour. A green tram crossed the signal. Radha, slightly confused, gathered her skirt and glanced at her wristwatch. She had to reach the doctor's clinic within 15 minutes. She lived in the apartment behind Basel SBB, near the 100,000-old bookstore. Do you know about that bookstore? I was there right before I came here. And the clinic was near Barfuserplatz. Not too far. It would take her 7 minutes max to reach. She waited patiently for the signal to turn green. A mother with a pram was crossing the street. She stopped when Radha got down from her bicycle. She glared at Radha, trying to soothe the toddler. Maybe she was getting late for her office and the child was throwing a tantrum before he got dropped off. Radha diverted her gaze. She didn't want anyone to make her feel guilty. Radha, too, had dropped off her son at a daycare 17 years back. Her children were now teenagers, busy with their schedules. Now I remember when I came to Basel, I was very new here, and I saw a sign, a lovely white heart-shaped sign, a graffiti on the road, and since I love art, I was asking who drew this on the street, and then my husband explained that someone actually had an accident there, and that's why there is art and there's a bouquet of flower next to it. So many years passed by, but that stayed in my subconscious mind somehow. And when I was writing about the story, so in this story, the protagonist Radha, she's carrying a lot of things in her mind, and when she reaches the spot with the heart, something happens. Some science fiction things happen, and she reaches a place where she meets 2 other characters, a young girl and an elderly lady. You have to read the next.
So my story in this book is called The Summer House. I'm not going to read it here. I hope that you'll get the book and that it'll interest you and you'll read it. And the reason I don't want to read the story is because I read to my children and it makes me very sleepy sometimes. So I associate reading with sleeping off late since I became a mom. But I want to talk about the story behind my story, because I think that that's quite important here. When we were kids, so my mother is one of 7 children. And the 7th one, that's my maternal uncle, was the youngest one. My grandmother, now this is real, this is not in the book. This is real. My grandmother, that's my mother's mother. Her brother did not have any children. So for some reason, my grandmother said, you know, I've got 7, you've got 0, you can have one of mine. So that's just how it went. And for some reason, they decided to have this conversation when my uncle was 22 years old. So that meant that he spent his childhood with my parents, with my mother, with his siblings, and they were very close. And that's how every summer we ended up going to meet him and to meet our uncles and aunts. Now, he happened to be adopted by his maternal uncle, whose wife inherited a 400-year-old mansion in Agra. And this mansion had beautiful panoramic views of Taj Mahal. So if you know the Taj Mahal, Agra is a city where Taj Mahal is, and the Agra Red Fort. So it's actually quite beautiful, the river flowing at the back. So that was actually my childhood summer nights spent looking at the Taj Mahal in the morning and every evening. And as every family has a nice storyteller, we also had a storyteller in our family. Somebody who told us stories that and built characters that were larger than life, that would put James Bond to shame. And each year we'd go back every summer asking, what happened to that story? And then he'd say, where did we leave it? Okay. And then the story will continue. So we continued that story for years, every summer, the ending story. And the power of that story was such that last year when I went to meet my cousin after many years, and we were remembering this relative, both of us looked at each other and we said, Vijay Thakur. And that was the character of the story that he'd actually built up for us. So that is the power of storytelling. And for me, the summer house actually demonstrates the power of storytelling because we're all connected through stories. What you heard here from all of us is a story. When women talk, I tell you my story, you tell me your story. Then you think, oh, I know somebody who had the story. And I say, yeah, I also know somebody who had the story, right? And it goes on and on and on. But essentially what we're doing through stories is we're seeking to understand. We're seeking to understand what happened to us, what might happen to us, about life, about our work, about our relationships. We're seeking all the time. Our mind is always trying to understand. And we do that through stories. And I think as a civilization, storytelling needs to be preserved. And that's the story of the summer house. Story and story, 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 story connected to each other in the summer house. So I hope you'll read it. Thank you very much.
We actually now have an interactive, we have some time to have an interactive session before we have the apero and if you want to buy some books.
So the panel is open to you if you want to ask us questions.
Yeah, how do you select your foods for each book?
That's a good question.
Yeah. So, we do everything democratically. So even selecting the cover, we have polls, doodle polls and everything. So similarly, around March, April, we come up with some titles or themes, and then we discuss it within our group, or group rather, and we vote, and the one which wins becomes the theme. And we do not announce the theme till the book is released. So but what we do is we select authors also, like as she mentioned, if you know someone who's a great storyteller, then we try to contact that person and ask you for some writing examples, and that's how we connect. Go forward.
Yeah, and then we set a deadline.
Yeah.
And then nobody meets deadlines, so we have something to
It's very,
it's a whole democratic process.
Yeah, and
lots of volunteers.
Yeah, so when we're sitting in the dentist lounge and then we're also writing, and we're all busy mothers, busy women, but we make sure that we are sticking to the timelines, and we make sure that the project, we take it as a project, we are all working towards it. So, yeah. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
And do you have like some session where you write together co-writing, or is like a timeline and that you like all work at different times and just be together? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't done co-writing. It's a great idea, and Brinda and I had this idea to have this workshop, right? And Brinda said, I would like to do co-writing. That hasn't happened yet, but perhaps we take that in the future. However, our authors are spread across the globe. So from Australia to Indonesia to Europe, the Americas. We don't do co-writing. That's the short answer. And the long answer is we get together twice a year to have tabs on what we're doing, what we want to do next year, who's going to volunteer for submissions, coordination, for marketing, for editing. So we have all of that on our platform.
Okay.
Thanks for your question.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have 100 questions, but I'll control myself. How do you decide? I was interested also that you're a non-profit, right? That you pay forwards. Where does the money go? Which charities do you support, and how do you choose them?
How do we choose
Tell us a little bit about that side of things.
So what we decided is we will publish these books, and irrespective of the sales or profit, every month 100 francs will be donated. How do we select? It's more a little bit of, we go for women and children like UNICEF and Give India projects where the children midday meals, or where kids from the street are being, they have a safe home. So we go for that kind of projects which are supporting vulnerable children and women especially. So 100 francs is what we have dedicated ourselves to. So we don't often meet it, but we try to do it as much as possible, because that's the only way we can go ahead. Yeah, that's also one of the reasons why we try to avoid any cost, and we do everything in-house. I mean, everything. For example, I've been leading a group of, we have typesetters. So I always have to just give them, can you typeset this? Can you do this? But for this book, I have to learn myself everything. I have to download the software, understand all these things, which I never really had to learn in my profession. So we all are learning on the job for these books, actually. So that's also a nice growth factor for us. Yes, learning on the job, and we keep rotating our jobs. So yes,
So, okay, go ahead. Why don't you go first, and then she raise her hand first? That's okay.
Some way or another. How do I contact you?
Buy our books.
buy our books. Talk about our books. That's one thing.
In publishing, in story, something else, maybe generating a cover book or something else, like in the process. Yes. How do I help you?
We have our contact numbers, I guess, right? Yes. So we always need volunteers, and we need people who can spread the word. Talk about our books, buy our books. We don't have a commercial publisher who's backing, big events. We thankfully, like GGG, Bibliothek Basel. I mean, it's very nice to host such events. So if you have a place where we can host more such talks, or book presentations, or if you know a newspaper who can write a review about us and our books, then please let us know. Or if you are going to a gathering where you would like to take our books with you, please let us know.
Yeah, I mean, we are just adding on to that point as well, and to your question, because we're a volunteer-led group, we have sometimes people contacting us for paid reviews, for example, but we don't have that kind of resources. So if you do know somebody who can review books and really publish that article, then that's very helpful.
I would like to piggyback on what Abhi mentioned. So if you end up reading our stories, please tell us how you felt after reading the poems, whatever. Any feedback that you give to us is very precious. So it just makes us do better and maybe think about things that you would like to read, you would like to hear from us. So that also gives us food for thought.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Because what's also important is none of us really are professional writers in that sense, you know. So we all are also learning, doing it, but we have pledged that we will do it because there are so many women who are still good at writing that they never actually sit down and write and publish. We did that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's also
Yes, I have more practical question, which you, so after you finish writing your stories, you then cross-proofread each other? And how it is done? Is it by just hazard, who reads who, and how it's?
So we have a group of people who volunteer to be editors. We have a submissions coordinator, and the submissions coordinator on Google Drive really will assign stories to the editors. After that, it's sent back to the authors to edit, to revise, comes back. Then we have a second round of review. So like I did that for She Speaks with Tista, our editor-in-chief. So we did a second round of review, just looking through each story, the flow, everything, basically. Then we send it back to the authors if we don't like some. Then it comes back. When it's all done, it's compiled into one document. Then it's sent off for proofreading. There's somebody who volunteers to be proofreaders. It's usually somebody who's also doing that in their job, and they're really good at it. They have an eye for it. And it's usually proofread by 1 or 2 people. That's the preference. After that, when it's all ready, we ask everybody, guys, final call. Nothing else changes now. This is the PDF. And then it goes to Brinda, that's the publisher. So the publisher will then typeset it, make sure there's a cover. So she does the cover and everything. And then the editors write a preface. So there's a lot that goes into it. And finally, it's sent off.
Yeah.
At least a month, at least 6 weeks before the launch date.
And I'd just like to piggyback on what you just said. From the authorial point of view, because this year I was not on the editing team, I was an author. There is a lot of grace in this process. Because it goes off to the editors read, they give very good, very detailed developmental feedback, which is actually a very good way for oneself to develop one's own writing. Like if you're me, probably, if you're anything like me, probably buy about 15 notebooks because they look pretty, and then you fill in the first page and it doesn't go right, and then you're like, oh, but it'll never be pretty, and then you just put it to the side, and then you end up writing the entire story in one night on a Google Doc on your phone. So, you know, it can be a very solitary experience. And then for the editors to sort of collaborate like this and give you that developmental feedback, you go, yeah, things make sense. It made sense at 3 a.m. Doesn't make sense now. But there are some lines that you will fight for, and there is a lot of grace in that process. There's a lot of freedom, a lot of autonomy here. So I think one of the reasons that we have, in our own quiet corner of the world, we have been thriving is because it is very, very collaborative, and everybody is constantly listening to everybody else. That's why it takes 1 year.
And I'd also like to add something to that from an editorial point. Then we'll come to your question. As an editor, my journey as an editor, I actually learned quite a lot about people's psyche and how people react to their own edits, to how their story is edited. Some people are more open, some people are more closed, but also for myself as an editor, I had to learn to respect somebody else's way or somebody else's perspective on how the story should end. For example, I've had sometimes a different point of view on how the story should end, because I felt personally it would give it a better twist. But then I go back to the author, and the author's feeling very, very strongly about giving it that ending. And at some point I had to respect that, because it's a democratic process and there's a lot of grace, as Nayana said. And then we had to come to a compromise and say, okay, if you want to have this ending, that's fine. However, let's put it in this way or that way. So as an editor as well, this is great learning. Just respecting somebody else's point of view, really.
Well, first of all, hats off, because everybody says everybody's got a book in them, but I've never found mine yet. So the fact that I have is amazing. But the other side of it, I'm just wanting to know a little bit more about you as people from the point of view of to get your story out. And you sound as though you spend a lot of time on this. But what do you take in? What kind of books do you read? What genre of books are you reading to kind of give you that? You know, the three of us, we're at a book club, so that's why you know. So we, but you know, so we're doing a lot of reading. I'm not doing a lot of writing. So I'm just wondering where you get food from for your creativity, what kind of genres you like. And just it could be something like science fiction. I think somebody mentioned at one point. You know, I'd just be interested in you as people. What you take.
So, I mean, if you were to ask me, I'm quite an omnivorous reader. So it doesn't matter if it's a child's book, children's book, or is it about from the cultural heritage. It could be. I have a nephew calling me 3 days back, and he calls me mommy, and he's my husband's sisters. As he mentioned, you all have different names. He called me and said, "What are you reading now, mommy?" And I said, "I'm reading the history of the Parsis." And he was like, "Why?" Which is different history of the Parsis. And then I said, like my husband, I have lots of books going on. They are like my family. I visit them from time to time. Something could be from the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Quran, or it could be something totally from the Western classics. Could be a Louisa May Alcott or one of the Austen classics, or could be Charles Dickens. And at the same time, could be, I don't know, Arundhati Roy or somebody else. So there are like a whole set of things that's there. When you talk about what inspires us, most of the time, during my editing experience, I saw that at least people go through their own life's experience and see what was there a little spark sitting there, and that is the one which is kind of ignited and then starts becoming bolder. And then the styles of writing comes from the kind of books they might have. So these all come together and kind of start, this whole thing, creating a sculpture, a word sculpture coming into form. This is my take on it.
Yeah.
We all have something to say.
Yeah, the question is like current
So my latest discovery, I say so grandly, but it's audiobooks.
Oh yeah.
I love audiobooks, and I know that are audiobooks real books? Of course they're real books. So what I have been doing is, just like Reggie has just mentioned, I have a number of books on the go. So there's one book, the audiobook, for when I'm on the train and there's nowhere to sit. Okay. There is another book that lives in my bag for the train ride. I kind of read it on the train ride. Then there's another book that I read to my daughter at night, which, by the way, is The Last Bear. So if you have a 6-year-old in your life, please read them The Last Bear. And then there are sort of like the really trashy romantic fiction. Trashy, she says. I love them. Okay. That I read just before sleeping at night, when I want to just switch my brain on. The audiobooks are usually, for me, non-fiction. So the one that I have just been reading is The Anarchy by William Dalrymple. So that was enormously eye-opening in every single way. The book that I have on the go right now is Secret History by Donna Tartt. And I'm reading The Last Bear, as I mentioned. And the book at night that I'm reading is called Really Good, actually. I think that's the title. I can show it to you later. But I suppose what's actually influenced me the most in terms of writing is picture books, bizarrely enough. Because picture books focus on one thing, and they are focused on developing one element to help a child prepare for the world, as it were. And in my stories, nothing much happens. Sorry. It's all about the protagonist's journey in their head, in their mind, and so on. And I've learned as opposed to siphon away all stuff just to focus on one single thing, from reading picture books to my children, and just focusing on that idea of one thread. Because left to my own devices, there were just threads spooling everywhere, and I'd never be able to tie them up at the end. So it's everything counts.
Yeah, so I'm a very temperamental reader. So sometimes I'm in the mood for philosophical books, sometimes I'm in the mood for fiction. I love Hermann Hesse, for example. That's one of my favorites. I love reading Rabindranath Rabindranath Tagore also. He's an Indian author. Different kinds of books. Lately, I've been reading more ancient Indian texts like Upanishads. I really love going through them again and again, because each time when you read, you realize something different. And I'm the kind of a reader, like if I like one author, then I'll just read all his books, that kind of reader. I will not really explore too many things. So from Elena Ferrante to Hermann Hesse, so that kind of person I am. Yes, that's very much about me. So I love reading in the morning before I have to start getting into my inbox and start my work. And I love reading sometimes in the night. But other than that, whatever free time I get, I sketch and read.
Well, I am, how do I put it? I used to absorb everything like a sponge when I was much younger. But lately, I think this also reflects my own journey in life. Almost exclusively not read fiction, but only non-fiction, from Indian scriptures to travelogues to the book I finished 2 days ago is a book by Paul Brunton. It's called The Search in Secret India. So that's his journey of finding a guru, a teacher for himself. And he goes all over India. This is 1928, Paul Brunton. So he has his own prejudices against India, but he's also looking for a teacher there, a spiritual teacher. So very, very interesting book. I also love reading poetry, so I read a lot of poetry as well. But as far as the writing process is concerned, I think to me it cooks in my head. It's like it goes on in my head. And it's kind of like a potter. So when you do pottery, you know you want to make a vase, but you don't really know how. So it's only when the wheel starts turning and you're really paying attention that you start to give it a shape. And that's just how I write my story, in one go usually. Usually in one go, yeah, over a weekend, and my husband's here, he knows, and my children are here, they know that they're not supposed to disturb me. I'm up in my room doing God knows what. I don't need to sleep or eat or anything. I'm just writing for that weekend. So, but it's been brewing for a long time, so it just comes out then. That's my process.
I have a question actually for you. I mean, you mentioned you're from a book club, so what genre of books do you enjoy reading?
Well, we're also a diverse group, right?
Yes.
So some we from feminist things,
Yes.
or some non-fiction. We read everything, honestly, from detective mysteries all the way through to story. Yeah, this year we've got things like the Princess Secrets with the Princess Aswad talking about her experiences and her support for women, actually, so that's very relevant. What else? Everybody Priestley. Yeah, J.B. Priestley, one of the very first plays. We might even put we promise, well, obviously put this on now. I mean,
we have different ladies in our group with different cultural backgrounds. So one lady's Korean, so we've read some Korean fiction.
Oh, yeah.
And got insights into kind of different cultures.
Yeah, I have to, your book's interesting because you gathered all of those different voices.
Yes.
And that's very much what I enjoy about when I read it. I want to hear different voices.
Yeah.
I want to hear different people's experiences.
Very true.
People in, places in the world, different
just different
That's
lives.
exactly what we are doing.
Yeah.
We are bringing together these voices, these stories, and putting them together. I
Exactly.
would like to mention this book also won the list, which we published last year. So here, you have stories like we hear about like someone who visited Antarctica, someone who visited Argentina, and they tell us these stories. We look at the pictures on Facebook, social media, and then we just forget, right? So we reached out to some of these travelers from Egypt, and Abhilasha is also here. I mean, you've written about your experience from Amazon, and these unique stories, that's what we're trying to collect, different genres, exactly what you mentioned.
It's
So
non-fiction.
this is
Travel
non-fiction.
memoir.
So we have a lot of non-fiction books also. We have a sketching diary also that is the first book that we published actually from Bose publishes as well. Yeah.
You had a question.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Then I guess we'll have to, you had a question too, and I think then we'll maybe take it to the apero.
When we,
Yeah,
we-
no, I'm
yeah.
very impressed how you did not just writing about very diverse, interesting topics, how products you have been over the past few years. Can you also describe your journey as a writer? Have you evolved from each book? Has it become easier? Has it, I mean, more in grip and more in for the specific topics that, and how do you find your own evolution?
I think it's like you go to this route, it's a place that you've never visited, and you find new doors. So every time there's a new door, there's something new behind it. We did learn, but
Yeah.
Abhilasha,
It's a challenge every sorry.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
It's a challenge every time, and we all are really rushing for time. None of us have really good time, so that's the biggest challenge for all of us. But we challenge ourselves with different topics. So, and we have a deadline, so we know we have to be disciplined, have to write it. And if we don't write it properly, editors are going to come back with thousands of changes. You better do it correctly. So, yeah, and in a way, in the WhatsApp group that we have, we also keep sharing some guidelines or videos from good authors or some tips that they are sharing, trying to evolve and learn in our way. What you mentioned, like in the first story, if I read my first story and the last story, I think the theme and the way I grasp the topic has changed. Maybe, or the kind of the way I reflect myself in the story has changed over the last 5 years. Maybe.
And I think you really caught the nerve there, because all our stories they're a reflection of where our consciousness is at that point in our lives, and that's reflected in the stories. And also as a journey, as a writer, this is really personal. I don't know if you ladies also experienced that. The biggest change that happened with me was at some point I realized that I have to get beyond approval. In the beginning, I would ask my friends to comment. I would say, do you think this is nice? Do you think it's not nice? And after some time, I realized I'm in it for writing. And there'll always be somebody, I mean, in this room, there'll be some people who like a particular story, others wouldn't. And at some point, you're just going to go nuts if you want to have everyone's approval. You write for yourself and just give it your best and forget about it. If somebody comes back and says, we did not like it, and I've had my friends say, hey, I think you better. And I mean, I'm actually very grateful for their honesty. It doesn't affect me so much because I think it's also a reflection of where they are. They probably didn't get the point, or, it's personal taste. I mean, you like certain foods, you don't like certain foods, and you cannot really take that as a mark of your own success if you start going for approval each time. And for me, this was really freeing as a writer. And I became more and more and more experimental with each story that I wrote. And I think that's culminated in this one, the summer house. It's been really experimental. And I think you had a question for
How opening those doors in writing every time that changed at the end of the journey? Okay, it's the last one is the best. Sorry, I feel-
Well, I can try. I can try. I think I always try to open very simply. I mentioned this already. And by the way, I'm an incredibly messy writer, which is not going to surprise any of the people on this panel or Pragati in the audience. So it's, I'm phenomenally messy at how I begin. I have this idea in my head, and it hasn't been real yet. It hasn't come true, but one day I'm going to find the perfect note. I'm going to walk into a stationery shop. I'm going to find the perfect notebook, and the pen that I pick will flow seamlessly, like a dream over the page, and then the words are just going to tumble out of me perfectly from beginning to middle to end. There will be no crossings out. There will be no scribbling in the margin. It will be so perfect that 150 years down the line, someone's going to want to archive it. Till date, this has not happened. I have sacrificed my husband. We live in a house like this with like tumbling notebooks everywhere. So my poor husband is like, could you maybe stop now? I mean, you have a phone with an app and an app. No, there is a notebook with my name on it. So I try. That's how I open doorways. I try with one notebook and then the other one and then the other one. And eventually it comes down to a rushed book, which I usually end up proofreading. But then the editors will still find things. They'll be like, how have I missed the fact that I've written two thers one after the other? I thought I proofread this 5-6 times. But I think it's just effort. At the end of the day, it's just effort, because there is always a point when I want to give up. And I just think, well, I'm done now. I've got work to do. I've got paid work to do. You know, there are people out in the morning who are waiting for me to turn up to teach them. And then their parents, you know, so I've got people to turn up for. You can't just stay out waiting. But I think though, that when the door opens, it usually is at like 5:30 in the morning. This is the thing. I mean, it is just effort and somehow against my better judgment showing up for myself, because my better judgment is to sleep.
Yeah, I mean, for me, ideas come when I don't have paper, pencil, or anything. I'm just walking back from big roads or something, you know, have a brilliant idea and I will sit down and write, but I never do. So that happens very often. But then I think writing is also about discipline. Writing is also about this collaborative process. I keep on saying I'm a very much a project-oriented person. I feel if you really want to do something, you have to allot some time for it. You have to be disciplined towards it. I'll just show this because I prepared it also. We are very critical about each other's writings. You know, when we start writing, it's very natural, we're emotional, we are writing down everything together. We have to structure it down. What is your key message? You know, we sometimes help the author to realize, go back to your writing. What is your key message? I mean, what are you writing about? Is there a peak? Is there a conclusion? Is there an introduction? Is it concise? Is it consistent? Is it credible? You know, so we are always cross-questioning each other. We are really trying to do it as a disciplined, collaborative effort. That's the only thing I can say.
I would just say, let's take it to the apero. 10 minutes to 9. And before we do that, we have someone we want to thank, and that lady's called Nicole Spoon.
Thank you. And, you know, thank you for sharing your stories and your experiences. And I just want to say, as we go into the approach, I think emotional. It's a unique and beautiful voice, and I hope that you take the opportunity to talk with each other tonight, because there's really a lot of special people here. And I think this is, I know a lot of you know each other, but stories just are what it's all about. And everything that we're struggling with in our current lives all come back to stories and histories and being vulnerable and telling each other, you know, who we are so we can help be a better world. Tonight the apero is free, but the library always takes donations, but feel free to help yourselves. And also we're so happy that you've already announced a new book that was released yesterday, She Seeks. All of the other books are available tonight. Back here at the table, you can continue to talk with the authors. They only take cash only, just to let you know, or twins. See how it's. And I hope that if you want to find out more about the English programs at the library, just come talk to me. I can add you to an email list where I share with you events that we do here, and we're always open to new ideas. But I feel really honored, and you did so much work in addition to tonight, and it's a pleasure to meet all of you. And thank you.
No, we were thinking we wouldn't have questions, and now it's like we're saying no.